Hi, I'm Christine Hodges. Today we're going to be looking at how to make a print using Tetrapak cartons. As an indication of the kind of work that you can produce, here are a few examples of prints I have made using Tetrapak cartons. And as an indicator of what the actual plates look like that we'll be creating that make these images, here are a few. So that's the plate and the print. This is the print and the plate. And plate and the print. So you see we can get some really nice effects just using Tetrapak carton. So the kind of cartons that I'm referring to are the things that you get, your soft drinks, milk, and some kinds of beans and things like that. So you might have black beans in something, you could have soya milk and skimmed milk, semi-skimmed milk. They've all got different surfaces inside, so this one's got a white carton that's got a shiny surface so that when you draw into it and when you cut into it, you can get ink to stay within those marks and print from it. Some work better as a surface than others, and the ones that I find work really well are the silver-backed cartons, such as the milk cartons. These work really nice. The surface is lovely and shiny, it's nice to draw into and it's nice to cut into. So that's the kind of carton that I'm going to be using today. Now, as you see, when you open these cartons up, you want to be quite careful really in how you cut them open, because you're going to make marks when you crumple them, and they're going to affect any print. So if you've got one that's crumpled a lot like this, you're going to have to think about it when you're using it for an image. Can you use those crumples? And sometimes you can. So don't throw them away because they're a bit crumpled. You'll find that some images you'll think, oh yes, well I can work with that. And the same with those that you don't crumple in that way. If you cut them open carefully, you've got ridges down them where they are folded. And you're going to need to work within that for your image as well. So sometimes you can incorporate that into the image or hide it in certain ways. So you're going to need to think about it. Oh, you can just work within the space inside those lines. So today we're going to try and do a print using these. The example I'm going to do is going to be something quite sort of straightforward really, but it gives you an idea of what you can do with it. So what are you going to need? You're going to need your carton, you're going to need some kitchen roll, because you're going to use that to wipe the plate. You're going to need a nice craft knife. You're going to need to use an etching needle or similar, something nice and sharp that you can draw into your plate with. You're going to need your sketch, and in this case I have got a sketch of some cones that I'm going to work on. So that's going to be the one I'm going to work on for this today. You're going to need to trace that sketch onto the carton, unless you're drawing freehand. So I've got my tracing paper, I've got some carbon paper to put underneath that, and then you're going to need your ink for inking up. I mean, I'm using Cranfield's Caligo Safe Washing because I like those. Some piece of card to spread the ink on, also some cotton wool buds. They're very handy for when you're wiping the plate, and as well as the kitchen roll, we're going to be using a few cotton buds just to make a few areas perhaps a bit cleaner than others. Then you're going to need something to print it through, so you're going to need a press. I'll show you mine later on. I'm going to be using a craft press, but you could, if you have not got anything like that, you can try and use things like the back of a spoon pressed down really hard on your paper. So the first thing we're going to need to do is take our sketch, and we're going to need to trace that ready to put onto the plate. So I've already traced mine, and I've used some red pen so that when I'm going to go over it to draw it onto the plate, then I can see that easily and where I've drawn over it and where I haven't. You're also going to need later on some gloves for when you're inking up, because you're going to get quite messy. Right, let's take us to the next stage. So we've traced our drawing. Right, we're now going to trace our drawing onto the plate. I can see that the image fits into one of these panels, so I'm going to just stick to that one panel. So we're not going to need to worry today about these lines on the outside. One thing to remember when you are doing any of these images is that when you're tracing the image down, it's going to be, if you did it the same way around as your drawing, then it will come and print the reverse image. So to get it to look the same as your drawing or whatever image you're using, you're going to need to reverse it, so that when you print it, it comes out the right way round. So do remember that. It's quite hard to remember sometimes, but that's what you need to do. So I'm going to tape it down. I'm going to get my carbon paper. I'm going to put the image tape down so that it doesn't slip as I'm tracing it. I want it to be sort of there. A bit more over. Don't like it to be too central. Pop the carbon paper underneath. And then draw it on. I like to use an old pen for this. You want to press hard enough to get the image, but not hard enough to make strong dents in it, because you're going to be drawing into it with your etching tool afterwards. let's just check that everything's there. Right, we're ready now to move on to the next stage, which is drawing through with our etching needle. I'm going to cut the plate down first so that it's the right size as well. So we're now moving on to the next stage of drawing into our plate. And I've got my etching needle ready to draw into it. You can, if you've got something like a sharp needle, you could try that. Any sharp instrument to draw into your plate. You can get variations in tone depending on how heavily you draw into it and how lightly you draw into it. And also another thing we're going to be doing is cutting into the top layer to get nice darks and peeling off little sections as well, so that we can get another tone that way. So I've got my sketch by me so that I can keep an eye on where I want to draw into it more, where I want darks, and we're going to start drawing now. You see I'm drawing quite firmly into it. You want nice clean lines here on these edges. I'm starting off with the straightforward outlines that I transferred, and then I'll build up on that later with some shading. So when you ink up, these are going to carry the ink and then transfer into your paper. And we're choosing quite a straightforward image today, so that you can see the process and then develop that further with your own images. So you see I'm doing a bit of shading there because I know that that is where there's not a hard line, and I'll build up more on that as I go along. I've drawn all the main outlines at the moment. Now I'm going to start building up now some of the shaded areas and some of the darks. So let's do some of the shady bits first. So those, just scratching into it lightly, giving it some tone. Thinking about where my darks are and my lights are in my sketch. And you do want to think about where you're drawing into it, because you can't erase these. Once they're there, they're there. So you do need to be sure that that's where you want your shading to be. So you can use some cross-hatching marks. All building up your tone. And helpfully, because of the silver and the way you're drawing into it, it does start to build up a tone like a pencil sketch, so you're starting to see your image as it would be. There will be other things that will affect that as well, because when you're wiping the plate, ink will get left in places and build up, and that will also help build up tone. So not all of these areas that are shiny will be left totally clean. I'll come to a bit there that I want to be quite dark. So this is one of those places where I can cut a bit out and build up a dark. So I'm going to get my craft knife and I'm going to draw into that little triangle that I want to be a dark. And then I'm going to peel that off. Now, one of the things I find quite handy, if I put it somewhere now, is to use a tweezers for this, because it really is quite hard to lift off sometimes. So just bear with me while I find my tweezers. Right, I've found my tweezers. Lift it a bit more. Because it's a plastic film, you do want the cuts to be quite clean, because you want these to be nice sharp edges that you're getting. There we are. So you can see a tweezers really helps get those bits off. And now you're thinking, well, why have you exposed that bit of card underneath? Well, you can see it's quite rough. So this now will give an extra bit of tone when you put your ink on, so you get a nice, nice dark there. We will protect it a bit when we're getting ready for printing. Once I've finished cutting all of this and drawing into it, I find it helpful to either put some acrylic varnish on it or some shellac on it. That will just protect it a bit more when you're putting the ink on, so that you're not rubbing it and causing it to be rougher and bits coming off. You don't have to, so if you haven't got any varnish and you haven't got any shellac, you can still print it without. But I do find it actually makes the plate a bit more robust if you seal those with some varnish. I'm going to continue now to draw into the plate and cut bits out. Okay, I'm going to carry on and come back to you later. Been drawing into it and scratching into it, varying the depth and pressure of the marks so that I can create some tone, and cutting out where I want a really dark. Each time comparing with my sketch, and am I getting the effect that I want? So if I turn that around, you can see already, even though we haven't inked it up yet, that it's starting to look like the sketch. So it's always interesting when you print them out. You never know exactly what you're going to get. But that's our basic mark making. So I don't think now that I'm going to add much more to this. What I'm going to do next now is another technique that you can use. To get a really white, it's quite nice sometimes to actually cut out areas so that they're white. So what I'm going to do on this one is I'm going to cut out the background of the fir cones. You've got it sitting on a table. There's the background there that I want to be quite clean. So we're going to cut around that, which is another nice thing you can do with a Tetrapak plate. So this is going to take a while, so I'll just start off and then I'll carry on and come back to you once I've finished. So I'm going to cut around. In fact, let me just go and fetch my scissors. I'm just going to cut a lot of the outer card off to make it easier to go around it with my craft knife. Don't need lots of excess card. And then I'm just gradually cutting it out. So this background area will then be an area that hasn't got any ink in the way and will come out nice and clean. So it's just another thing that you can do with the Tetrapak plates. You can shape them. Being careful to cut right through the card and get nice clean edges. Bit's a bit stubborn. Right, I'm just going to carry on cutting around this and then I'll rejoin you when I've finished. I'm just inking the plate up. I've just got a piece of card that I'm using to spread the ink on, covering all the plate, making sure I get into all those marks I've made. Okay, now I can start to take the ink off. I'm going to use a piece of directory paper just to get the main bit of ink off. Before I start to use some kitchen roll. Now you want a nice quality kitchen roll, you don't want something that's going to have bits of it coming off, so don't use the cheap stuff. And I'll show you, if I start there, just wiping it away. Can over wipe, so be careful you're not taking all the ink off. And you can start to see now the image appearing. So you can start to see the cone appearing there now. I'm going to carry on wiping this plate and then I'll come back to you when we're finished just to show you the last little bits about the wiping. Okay, so I've wiped the plate and now I'm going to just check that I've wiped it enough in all areas. What's quite useful to do is to go over little bits with a cotton wool bud sometimes just to highlight them a bit more. There's a couple of bits there where just can give that a little bit more of a wipe. You don't want to wipe too much, you can't overdo it. ready for printing. The printing paper has been soaked and blotted with blotting paper, ready for printing. Right, let's see what our print has turned out like. And there we are, fir cones printed using Tetrapak. Happy printing! To check out more of my work at christinehodgesart.co.uk or Instagram at chrishodgesart.